nation. Rise up and unite. Woo! Rise up.
Good evening, everyone. How are you? Welcome to the Layover, everyone. Hi, Lyndsay. How are you?
Good, thanks.
Good. That's very quiet and tentative again. Come on. No Scotty this evening. He has just
Failed.
Yeah, he's working. He's working for a living. God bless him. So he's about halfway across the Atlantic somewhere now. So
I think he's got 5. Is it 5 Washingtons this month?
Someone has to do that.
And this is number 3 or 4.
This is his Washington posting.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's good. It's good. So how's your week been?
It's been okay. I'm looking forward to getting out of lockdown.
We are closing in on the end of lockdown. Highlight of my week was I got a rescan at Waitrose. That was the highlight of my week. Hi, everybody, to everybody who is online. Great to see you. We've got a great show coming up, actually. A couple of things from this week. Obviously, lockdown, box sets, The Crown.
We have been binge watching.
Been through the lot,
yeah.
Quite frankly. This is an account I follow, Austerity Airliners. I love it. My history is that I flew the Handy Page Herald. It was a horrible old freighter, and it was a real mess of an airplane at the time. But God bless it, it was a beast.
Where was that based?
Based in Bournemouth.
And you went to Jersey?
Channel Islands all the time. That was my paper round. 6:15 every morning into Guernsey. Yeah, it was great fun. So this is a photo in period of a Viscount that was prepared for various HRHs. I just want to point out a couple of things. Enormous windows.
I also feel like I would like those flowers on board my aircraft.
An awful lot of flowers. There's a serious flower game going on there. But big shout out to the Crown, because their aeroplane game generally is fantastic. They have been super accurate.
So just to give some background on this, Mark and I are unable to watch movies, TV dramas, anything that involves an aircraft, because 9 times out of 10 there'll be an error. And Mark feels like he has to point this out to me in great technical detail. And by the time he's finished, the show's almost over. And it's taken until season 4 of The Crown for him to highlight such an error. Can you remember what it was?
It was a Seneca 5 in Mystique. Just want to point that out.
So why was that wrong?
Oh, Seneca 5 was not introduced till about 93 or something like that. Anyway, way too late.
So hopefully, viewers, you'll have some sympathy with me when when I have to sit and listen.
I know. But superb to see historic aeroplanes. Use fairly recently restored Wessex historic helicopters coming back, which is absolutely awesome. But it's brilliant. It's got some great aeroplanes. It's got great cars. It's a fantastic watch.
Oh yes. So Ellie Carter. This tweet was a tweet that she put out in the middle of the week, and it caught my eye because she says, "Blimey, today I'm 18 and I can't believe I've been flying solo for 4 years," which just blows my mind. So it used to be in the UK that you were able to solo a glider at 16 and powered aircraft at 17.
Yes.
I think. And then when EASA came in, they had to kind of go down to the lowest age or lowest common denominator, which was Germany, which allowed students to go solo in a glider at 14 as a kind of result of World War II. So the UK adopted that practice as well, which is why people like Ellie can go solo in a glider at 14. Now, I think back to when I was 14 and the responsibility of, getting out of bed and getting to school on time was probably the most I could handle, let alone, being in charge of an aircraft. So I think it just goes to show, such a level of maturity and decision-making And I think, her account is a really, really good one to follow if you're interested in general aviation. If you are like a young girl wanting to get involved, or even, a young boy, then, she's got some really good tweets. She's got some really good pictures. She typically flies around a little L4 Cub, same style of aircraft that Mark and I fly. And I just think it's really inspirational. And even if you're a bit older and you're starting out, doing your PPL, in your 20s or 30s or 40s, this young lady shows what you can achieve with a bit of determination. And I just, just caught my eye, and I think, really good on her.
Absolutely. And of course, gliding doesn't have to be expensive.
Yeah.
There's always a need for people up at launch points, and I'm sure your local gliding club will run some kind of youth scheme. You can just get involved without really spending any great money. Or
there was another tweet she tweeted, I think it was a couple of weeks ago, and the combined age, so she took a passenger up with her, and the combined age in the Cub was 26.
Was it?
Yeah. And I thought that's younger than most normal, PPL holders. So I thought that was really good as well.
I've been flying longer than that.
Yeah.
That's awesome. Well, look, we're all looking forward to the end of lockdown.
Yes.
So the DFT have published some rules. It's enough to bring you to tears. Oh, okay, yeah, but it is true. It's a very strange situation. So it depends which tier you're in as to where you can fly. It's relatively confusing, but hey, let's not get too wound up about it. What can we do about it? Well, we can look after our own flying operation, can't we? I know I'm going to prepare for going flying. Hopefully at the weekend, we're going to go flying together.
We are.
I'll get my head in the books, make sure I'm recent, legal. Make sure the airfield hasn't changed. The CAA, I was shocked to see that the CAA produced a podcast. I did have a listen. It does have some good points in it. I kind of wish they would bring industry into that podcast. Really, that would be better. But there you go. It's all out there. So I'm really looking forward to seeing your flying pictures on the weekend.
Yep. Hopefully the weather's good.
Hopefully, you haven't looked yet. That's probably some
Friday's
feedback on my prep. Good. So look, Scotty's flying one of these. He's posted some nice videos. The whole Twickenham England rugby thing has
struck a nerve.
Yeah, struck a nerve. That hasn't gone well. And really, so let's get to the main event, shall we?
Yeah, there's probably enough of us.
I mean, Matt has sent us some great photos. So look. So on tonight's show, we've got Matt Dearden. He is a pilot who's had a very adventurous career path. I said the runway less travelled, and there's absolute certainty there. And you might recognise him. He was in a show called The Worst Place in the World to Be a Pilot. Looks like one of the best places, if I'm really honest. And you might have met him at an air show because he flies the enormous Catalina. You might have read his writing in Flyer magazine. He's a huge aeroplane head. I've been lucky enough to go flying with him in the PC-12, and some of his destinations in the show and in the PC-12 a little bit hair-raising. Scenery is always spectacular. You can count on Matt for a really good Wing Friday. But I was really struck with how professional he was in the aeroplane, how brilliantly operated the aeroplane, and carefully his sort of approach to risk was really awesome. His weapon of choice out in Papua was the Pilatus Porter, and he's with us to talk to us about his journey from Bristol in the UK to rainforests and jungles in Papua. It must make you a different kind of pilot, that experience, change you as a person. And I'm hoping that Matt will share with us a few of those experiences. So, Matt, welcome to the show.
Hello. Hi, Lyndsay. Hi, Mark. How are you guys?
How are you doing?
Yeah, not too bad. Not too bad. How are you guys?
Very good. Now you're still working in lockdown, or are you allowed to work?
No. Yeah, we are allowed to work, but there's nowhere to go really. So PC-12 has been quite quiet, so it's gone in for an annual, and I think my colleague has taken it off somewhere today now. So yeah, once I get to chat to you guys.
Well, it's really good to have you here. So Matt, I'm going to put this picture up. So I'm going to describe it because people listen to this afterwards as a podcast. it is you looking quite smug, I have to say, at the top of a very looking airstrip pointing off into just green, furry looking hills.
It kind of reminds me of the ski jumpers
Yeah.
at the Winter Olympics, just before they're about to do the massive, huge ski jump.
Yeah, it's nearly that level of slopiness. So Matt,
yeah, not dissimilar, not dissimilar.
okay, right. So it's not a trick of the camera. It really is pretty
No,
steep.
it really is that steep.
So Matt, can you tell us how
Yeah,
you got there,
right.
how you put the airplane there, and then I guess what comes next?
Right, so this is Bangor Airstrip in Papua, Indonesia. It's on the sort of Papua New Guinea island. That runway slope at the steepest section is about 30% upslope, which is beyond any performance data for that aircraft. So you have to kind of build up to this sort of thing. The trick really with the landing is just making sure you've got enough energy to pull the aircraft up. Obviously, with a normal landing, you're sort of dissipating the energy to touch down on a flat runway. But a runway like that, you need to use the energy to pull the aircraft all the way up to that sort of little parking area on the top there. So the landing is actually quite straightforward once you're used to the perspective, because obviously there's a lot of visual clues there which just throw you off completely. You know, you sort of look like you're a little bit too low on the approach, and so you end up just making a little bit of a hash of the whole thing. But once you're used to that, you sort of touch down, check the brakes, make sure that you've got that all under hand, and then you add power, and then you power it all the way up to the top, because if you stop on that slope, it's too steep for the aircraft to then power itself up even at full power. You'll actually be stuck trying to hold it on the propeller. The brakes won't hold you, so you need to keep that energy going up onto the top there, and then turn it around in that little bay, which is just about big enough to hit the tail round without clouting into the rocks there or anything. And then put this park and brake on, make sure it's on, and then shut her down.
And on finals, Matt, you're which bit are you looking at? Are you focusing on your touchdown point there, or are you trying not to be fooled by the optical illusions? Or
Yeah, it's that sort of optical illusion, because obviously when you're sort of landing on a flat runway, you've got that sort of normal slope, but then when the runway is doing that, it'll make you think you're too high, so you end up coming too low. You actually need to kind of correct, and so actually when you come in, the runway looks impossible to land on. It looks like you're so steep as you're coming down onto it, and when they are that steep, you're just sort of aiming at the touchdown point, but you don't need to land too far in because it's so steep. You just need to land somewhere near the beginning of it, because you stop so quickly. You know, it's the gravity assist on that's unbelievable. As I say, you sort of touch down, just making sure you've got some brakes, and then you add power. It's so counterintuitive. I suppose it's a bit like a carrier landing or something. I've never done one, but I can imagine it's sort of not dissimilar in that sort of counterintuitive approach to the touchdown.
And Matt, when you get to the top in this sort of turning circle, you turn it on
Yeah.
your own power, or do you just stop and then help get assistance to have it pointing in the right direction?
If you've got it right, then you should be able to do it under the power of the aircraft, but sometimes maybe it didn't quite come up right,
Okay.
and then you're sort of looking at the wingtip, and you're sort of looking at, oh no, we're going to hit the rocks, so you end up just shutting it down, facing the other way. And Pilatus Porters come with a little tow bar thing in the tail section. You can whip that out, put it onto the tail
okay.
wheel, and then kind of pull the thing back round with a few helpful locals. It's it's all good fun.
And so, having got up there, I don't know if is your heart rate high at that point? Are you thinking, thank God I've made it? Or...
I suppose like the first time you start, like if it's somewhere new you've not been before, that might elevate your heart rate a little bit. But if it's sort of one of the normal places, then not really. It's sort of
I'm just checking.
becomes a bit normal. It's quite weird.
And I'm checking out my heart rate, and it's elevated just looking at the picture, let alone being present for the landing.
It's fascinating. And so you're there, you're shut down. What comes out the airplane? What goes back in?
So usually you're dropping off. Often it's a mixed load, so it'll be some local people who were probably from that village or somewhere nearby. plus a load of their belongings, and then random stuff, building supplies, food supplies, whatever can fits in the back, really. It's kind of became the kind of mantra with the Porter, was if it fits, it flies, was how it used to be.
And
As long as you've got it under the yeah.
And what's been the most sort of crazy, what's been the craziest cargo that you've carried?
Live pigs, that was always an interesting one. You have to watch their urine, because it's quite alkali and it rots aluminium.
Oh, yeah.
Okay, that sounds bad.
Other things, plastic trees. I remember flying a load of plastic trees into an airstrip once because they're having a ceremony, so they needed some trees.
I don't know, just my view, but they look quite well furnished for trees up there.
Yeah, I know. I found it a fairly ironic flight, but there we go. I'm just paid to fly, so
we'll go back. We'll come back to this, but Lane here, she's interested to know: does it go in every week, or is it every day, or?
This particular airstrip, this one was just a sort of charter. I think I went into this one about 3 or 4 times, so not very often. But we did have weekly flights. We had a sort of subsidized flight schedule, so certain villages would be connected into a larger town, and that's those kind of common flights would happen almost daily, actually, sort of depended on which village it was. So there was a rough schedule, but outside of that, then it was just ad hoc charter. It was basically whoever paid for the aircraft to go somewhere and take something. That's how it was.
Well, you've made it sound very kind of straightforward, and I'm sure that's the kind of end result. But take me back to you learning to fly. Yeah, how did you get into flying? What did you think you were going to do?
So it started when I was a teenager, I suppose, at school. I was quite lucky in that I was in the RAF cadets with school, so I got a flight in a Bulldog, and that kind of perked the interest initially in light aircraft. But I was fully into IT, so I just dismissed that because I wear contact lenses and glasses. So I kind of thought, well, I can't fly airplanes. That's not possible. So I kind of dismissed it, carried on with my IT, and then sort of mid 2000s, I then thought, oh yeah, actually I really enjoyed flying airplanes. Managed to save a little bit of money, and I thought I'll just do a PPL. That would be something to do. I realized you actually then could fly commercially, despite eyesight. I find that ironic that RAF pilots, just one of you, must have perfect eyesight, but commercial pilots, you can wear some glasses and fly hundreds of people. But anyway, so I then did the PPL, and during that, I thought, actually, this is really good fun. I wouldn't mind seeing if I could do this as a bit of a career change, because I was getting a bit bored of the Monday to Friday, 9 to 5 and all that. And so, yeah, did my modular CPL IR distance length with the ATPL, thinking, yeah, I'll get a job with EasyJet or BA or somebody like that. This was end of 2008 when the world's biggest recession hit. Probably not dissimilar to how we are now with aviation. And there were no jobs. So it was then a sort of desperate Excel spreadsheet of hundreds of companies I could find anywhere in the world, basically, who might employ someone with 250 hours or whatever it was. And yeah, Susi Air appeared on my radar.
And had you sort of said, had you waded into the IT company and said, by the way, I'm off, and burned your bridges, or could you have just hung around, carried on?
No, I mean, I kept the day job. I mean, that was the nice thing with doing the modular route, was I was able to sort of take a sort of few sabbaticals to do the commercial and the instrument ratings, and whilst keeping the job, which is the main thing. So I still had a job at that point, but not flying. So that was quite fortunate, I suppose. And then, yeah, when I got offered the job, they gave me 10 days notice to get out to Indonesia. So I remember going into work on the Monday morning and telling my boss, hey, that's, I've been looking to be a pilot and everything. And he said, oh yeah, how's that going? I said, oh, I've got a job. And he's like, oh, great. When do you start? I said, next week.
week Friday.
Yeah. So he said, oh, I guess you're not going to do your 4 weeks notice. I said, no.
And what kind of recruitment
So
process?
he was very good, actually.
Did they kind of just check you for a pulse, or is it a bit more involved than that? Do they want to know you can fly?
At Susi, so I think it's changed over the years, but I actually had to do a full, the psychometric testing. So I went to Munich actually and met one of their senior pilots there, and I did 3 or 4 hours in front of a computer doing all these, hand-eye coordination tests, and I can't remember what you call these kind of things now. Psychometric tests, I suppose. I don't.
Yeah.
There's probably another word for it these days. And plus a CPL-IR exam and a full interview. So it was a whole day's worth of sort of testing. So it wasn't just, have you got a pulse and a license? It was, they wanted to make sure you weren't going to run away, I suppose.
Because this is a very,
I think these days. Yeah, absolutely. Like Susi Air is it's one of those companies that, whilst it's out in the far flung, which is a fairly risky environment as it just off the bat, basically. Susi herself concluded that if she employs expat pilots, you're kind of mitigating a lot of the risk, because the locals are a little known for pushing it a bit harder, perhaps, than some of the expats will. So, the accident rate, I suppose, spoke for itself by comparison to a lot of the other companies out there. And these days, they've even got a simulator, a $2 million Cessna Caravan simulator. So, the training is ongoing.
And so you get would you get an email that says, "Hey Matt, well done. You've passed all our battery of tests, medical, ground, school exam. Get yourself to, I don't know, Jakarta." I don't know where it.
Yeah, that's it. Yeah, Jakarta. That's right. So from there it was. At those days, Susi was quite a small company. I think they only had about maybe a dozen airplanes. Right. I think it's up to about 50 odd these days. But I'd never been out that part of the world. Although I have an expat upbringing. So I grew up in the Middle East. So I was used to kind of traveling around, but I'd never been to Jakarta or any of these places. So it was certainly a sort of baptism of fire, just jumping into all of that and not really knowing what was going to come next.
And were you?
Yeah, that's a good one.
Were you expecting this sort of thing?
No, not quite like that. I didn't even know at this point that they had Pilatus Porters. I don't think I'd even really knew what a Pilatus Porter was when I went out there. I'd applied for a right seat co-pilot job on a Caravan. Was how it started.
Right.
And my genuine idea was that I'd go out there for a couple of years, get command on the Caravan, get 1,500 hours, come back and work for BA or EasyJet or somebody. That was the goal. I still had this very fixed commercial pilot view in my head of what I wanted to do.
And for those who are watching or listening and who maybe haven't been through this, it was certainly my experience is you're interested in really the next thing, the next step. You go through this machinery, particularly as what it's called modular. Is that you've got all these steps, haven't you? And so it's like, okay, I've got to get a job. I've got to get a job now. Yes, that'll do. For me, it was Channel Express at Bournemouth, and I turned up and I looked at the aeroplane and thought, wow, that's not quite what I was expecting. But this is to another level.
Yeah. I suppose it was an interesting journey, I suppose, because obviously, as I say, I went out there expecting just to spend a couple of years and then come back, and that was going to be that. But something kind of happened. I kind of got bitten by the aviation bug way more than I thought of flying these kind of planes. So the Caravan is a great airplane, and I absolutely love flying it. But then within 6 months, I was out in Papua where the Porters fly, and I saw one for the first time. I'd never seen one before. And I thought, wow, that is a really cool plane. Like, I really would love to go on one of those. So I kind of got chatting to the pilots. These are single pilots. So the Caravan were multi-crew, but the Porter's a single pilot. So they could take someone with you. So I hitched a lift with one of the guys, and that was it. It was like almost love at first sight, I suppose. And I just made a beeline for it. I just kept saying to everybody, I want to fly the Porters. I want to fly the Porters. And obviously ultimately met the Porter's chief pilot, the fleet manager, and chatted to him about it. And then, I suppose the rest is history. Within 2 years of being at Susi Air, I was flying the Porters.
So So kind of day one, like if I'd have gone out there, I'd have had suit carrier, wheelie bag,
Coffee in your hand.
Yeah, I'd probably have my espresso machine. You turn up in Jakarta with your bag over your shoulder, show me to the Cessna 208, and they sort of take you under their wing and sort of literally and metaphorically and figuratively, and they accommodate you. Are you starting with other people?
Yeah, so each intake, it's normally about half a dozen people or so, something like that. And a real mix of backgrounds from all over the world. You've got people from South Africa, Australia, France, the UK, and actually they've started taking on a lot of local pilots now as well, and other parts of Asia. There was a Singaporean chap on my course when I joined. And yeah, they do metaphorically and figuratively take you under their wing. You get paid nothing, but they put you up in accommodation, they give you food, they have drivers to take you to the airports to fly the planes. And they give you all the training. They rate you on the aircraft. They put you through the exams and the medical and everything else out there. So yeah, you basically just do what you're told, I suppose, and make sure you pass each test, basically.
So they have a structure in their mind of how they're going to get you into this environment, which sounds like they know that if they expose every person in the right-hand seat to the following steps, then the chances are they're going to be kind of safer and better. So you end up flying the caravan, and what's the average sector length?
It's about an hour. Most flights are 1 hour, from normally a larger airport to some smaller airport and then back again. That's a sort of normal spoke and hub kind of configuration. And then obviously from that larger airport, they can then connect with a Boeing or an Airbus or whatever to go further afield if they want. And that's the sort of general network to have how it works in Indonesia. Because Susi Air flies what's called apprentice routes, which translates as pioneering routes. So the caravans and the porters, they're connecting these larger airports to small airstrips on brand new routes that have only just been established. If they prove popular, what generally happens is that small runway gets extended a bit, and then maybe something like an ATR can land there. And then obviously it expands from there. And if it gets really popular, then obviously they can start bringing big jets in. So I saw it over the years. I mean, I was there for 7 years, and there's quite a few airports that sort of started as 800-meter dirt strip and ended up being 1,800-meter tarmac runway that a Boeing would land on.
Yeah.
So it was actually quite interesting to see that evolution happening.
And the sort of geographic environment is not much road infrastructure, a kind of developing economy, just difficult to get around, basically. Is that right?
Yeah, basically, yeah. And particularly out in Papua, just because of the mountains. Out there, there's, 16,000 foot's the highest peak out there. Average peaks are probably sort of between 13,000, 14,000 feet. And yes, to build roads over that sort of stuff, although they do try, and I do believe there's a few more roads now, it's still just so remote and so hard to get from one part to another, particularly if the road gets washed away by the rains or whatever else, or an earthquake, which again are quite common out there. The aircraft is going to be around for a while.
And so Lyndsay's going to run a video. There won't be any sound. It's one of your drone videos, but we'll watch the video, and then we'll come back and we'll talk a little bit more.
So,
wow.
yeah, that's a good one.
So
ironically, that's actually one of the easier ones.
Really? Okay, so I saw bendy takeoff point.
So steep drops either side.
Yeah, exposure.
Yes, knife edge ridge.
Yeah.
Clouds. Down, up, trees. Just generally sort of weather around there.
Yes, the weather was the bit that made that one tricky, actually. Sometimes
I can see the terminal there.
I
presume there's a branch of boots in there, and somewhere where you can buy a
expensive
short
over at Smith, I'm sure.
Correct.
So what are your considerations for getting in and out of a strip like that?
So yeah, that one's obviously on a bit of a knife edge. So it's called Singer, by the way. It's just north of Tamika, on the kind of edge of the sort of spine of Papua. And it's, what was that, 6,500 feet, I think, something like that. 550 meters, which is pretty long for a strip in Papua. But the weather was definitely the big one. You could get winds coming from the larger peaks nearby, which could then whip across the top of it and cause rotor wash. So you get a bit of wind shear on shorter finals, which could be quite interesting. But the clouds and that, because it's in a bit of a bowl, they could easily form, particularly sort of late morning. You get a lot of clouds forming around there. And there's obviously a lot of terrain around there. So IMC flying is absolutely no. You know, if it's anything like that, you just don't go down there. But as I say, it's not actually too bad, that one. The departure is quite fun because obviously you go from sort of 0 to 6,500 feet in seconds, which is quite interesting. The ground just drops away. So it's one of those. It's quite exciting, actually.
So
it's one of those ones that sort of,
don't take it personally, but you know, this being lockdown, we don't have any kind of support for looking after the baby. So Lyndsay's just hopped up.
Absolutely fine.
So it strikes me as, does the weather move very quickly in that part of the world? Is it difficult to keep track of where things are?
Yeah, I mean, it's equatorial weather, so it will follow a sort of general pattern. You'll get, if the weather sort of starts clear and bright in the morning, then you'll know by late morning, mid-afternoon, you'll get huge thunderstorms, big cloud buildups, just because the land has been heated up by the sun, and then it'll just perpetuate. And you'll go through that cycle for a few days, and then it'll slowly shift into perhaps more of a foggy, low cloud kind of a morning, where you're just sitting on the ground going, well, we're not going anywhere, because it's, well, kind of like the UK weather at the moment, just super foggy, you can't see anything. But that'll tend to burn off by kind of late morning, and then you can actually go flying again. Or you get those sort of, the perfect days when it's a little bit overcast in the morning, because that then keeps all the winds down. You can still fly, which is nice. And then you fly later into the day because the winds, the anabatic winds, really pick up in the afternoons. So by sort of lunchtime, you're done. You know, we start at dawn, basically, as soon as the sun comes up, and go through until it starts to get a bit too windy. I always remember when I did my meteorology in ATPLs, reading about anabatic, upsloping winds that sort of come up the side of hills. And I thought, what kind of idiot's going to build a runway right by mountains? Why am I even learning this? It's pointless. And yeah, turns out it was really relevant.
Yeah, that's right. That's exactly right. I think pretty much all of us have had that experience. And you're sitting there in a classroom, you're thinking, what is this? I'm just going to remember it for the exam.
Yeah.
I think a friend of mine had a filthy rhyme for anabatic and katabatic. I can't even remember what it was, but I know I got the question right, and that was it. And then, of course, you find yourself in a situation where it's actually relevant. It's really quite extraordinary.
Yeah. So I've got a question. When you fly into these sort of remote villages, and I'm guessing there's lots of valleys to fly through, and you're quite high altitude. Do you have sort of decision points along the way where you think, okay, I've got to this point and we're still good on weather, so we can continue, and you get to the next point and you think, yep, we're still good to continue? Or do you have kind of mental markers in your head along the flight plan where you think, okay, I'm going to bin it if the conditions are bad here? Or how is your kind of decision to continue from starting off at the large airport to getting into the smaller airports?
So generally, if the weather's visual, then we'll just fly visually. So GPS has made a huge difference, by the way, to navigation in this part of the world. How the sort of original missionaries and whatnot did it before that with Dead Reckoning, hats off to those guys, because that's serious navigation, that is. But they would fly purely visually, because there's just no other safe way of doing it. With modern GPS and everything, you can fly a GPS track at a safe altitude that's already been worked out by either yourself or someone before you, who's basically worked out a set network of routes that will get you from the bigger airports to a certain area or into a certain valley. And then that's the point where you're kind of making that decision. So you might be flying IMC for most of the way. And then you're clear of the ridges and you're coming down to an MSA. And if you get visual, great, we can make the landing. If you don't get visual, climb back up and you head back home again. Basically, it's pretty straightforward. There's not really, it's fairly black and white in that regard, because you just don't muck around low level with clouds and mountains. Doesn't go well.
And you talked about there's a difference in the safety record between the operators out there. We all know that Indonesia in general has a slightly more questionable safety record, but were there operators that were more prone, for example, to maybe pushing it a bit harder?
I mean, definitely, particularly the ones who were doing more scheduled stuff, so they'd just do the same route day in, day out. And so GPS was interesting because on the one hand, it enhanced safety. CFITs went down hugely, so control flight into terrain, that didn't happen so much. But on the other hand, people would rely on it really heavily, and so they'd push it, because obviously with a GPS point, you can get yourself to an exact location over the terrain and potentially come down very low over that terrain if you think you know how high it is and you have faith in your altimeter to the nth degree. And so, certainly on the scheduled ones, you'd hear of, even see the accidents of guys who would just come down, even lower than you come down on ILS minimas on a GPS track that they've just invented. And unsurprisingly, it didn't always go very well. I mean, for instance, I think I gave you a picture of a 737, which was probably doing exactly that. Just came down a little bit. And this happened regularly. This is Walminer Airport. I mean, it's obviously quite a nice day. To be fair, I'm not even sure. Maybe he wasn't pushing it, this guy. I think he actually just landed a bit short of the runway. But the runway isn't very long, actually, for the 737 at 5,000 feet. I remember it's 2,000. I think it used to be 1,800 meters, and then they extended it to 2,000, and then maybe 2,200 in the end. But that was still a bit short when you're a heavy laden 7.3.
I used
so instead of going for the,
it's not great. It has little wheels. It's not very good at stopping. This one's obviously better at stopping because it doesn't have any wheels.
I mean, it stopped pretty well, actually. I think it barely used half the runway, but it ripped them off as it touched down on the dirt before the runway, hit the lip of the runway, which collapsed the wheels. But this particular airport, there's no instrument approaches into it. It's in a reasonably tight valley, and the GPS approach that people would use to get in there had to be offset slightly because of a bit of terrain on the actual approach. And so they'd break the clouds, and if they weren't, high enough, they just couldn't do the visual maneuver to touch down, and so they'd, end up like that or similar.
So how did you develop your kind of approach to managing risk and managing getting in and out of these places? Did you presumably you just didn't kind of go straight into this place?
No, so I mean, the best bit of advice I was ever given actually was by my instructor on the Porter, a guy called Sven Imsan, Swiss guy, sorry. And he basically said to me after I spent 2 weeks flying with him doing my type rating on the Porter, he said, so this is your kind of experience. It's here. This is how good you are right now. But he said, fly within that initially and just stay with that. But then as you start to get a bit more confident with the aircraft, start to come to the edges of that box, just right to the edge of it, just push it a little bit, but not too much. He said, because then your box will get a little bigger like this, and then a little bigger like this, and a little bigger like this, as you keep doing that. And so then if something happens that's outside of this box, if you stayed within it the whole time here, and something way out here happened, a whole load of stuff just went a bit wrong, you're probably going to be stuffed. You're not going to be able to recover it. But if your box is now this big and it's just gone outside the edge of it, you'll probably, you have enough experience to rely on to sort of save you from that situation. And that's kind of how it was really. So we started out in Borneo, where the strips were a little bit easier, a little bit longer. The weather wasn't quite so vicious, and there wasn't so much mountains. At Borneo, if you look at 10,000 feet, you wouldn't hit anything. In Papua, you'd hit many things. And so it was just sort of step-by-step approach, I suppose. Just gaining that experience. There's only so much instructing you can do in an environment like this. You actually just have to go out there and fly and get the experience, basically.
Well, all instructing
So,
is about enabling you to make the next step yourself, isn't it? Let's face it.
Sure.
Really good instructing. And we're going to play another video in a second, but it's really interesting, isn't it? Because this is where private flying approach and then the commercial approach is slightly different. You can't take a completely precautionary approach.
Definitely. You
have to adopt some risk, but equally you also have to have an out, as you mentioned.
Yeah.
We have a little look at this video.
Yeah.
So again, no sound, but
yeah, this is another steeper one. Weepon, this one was called. 8,000 feet high as well, so it's got serious density altitude problems going in here.
Wow.
There we go. So I don't know if people could hear as we're chatting there, but what did you say? 8,000 feet high?
So yeah, 8,000 foot, that one. I can't remember the length of it. It's not that long, but it's not crazy short. Somewhere around about 300 meters, something like that. But the bottom section's unusable because it all got eroded in a rainstorm once. So you can only use about 200 meters of it, something like that, maybe 250 meters.
And we were chatting earlier, and you said that they make a lot of these strips by hand.
Yeah, I'm not sure how Weepon was constructed, to be fair, but yeah, a lot of them are just hand constructed. So, they would basically use, if there's an area of land they wanted to clear, they would use hand tools, so spades and shovels, and even just lengths of rebar. If there's a big boulder in the way, they'd just chip away at that for years, basically, to make it small enough so that it's either flat or just enough out the way. And so, yeah, I think I opened up an airstrip, which took them something like 8-9 years to build. Some of the longer ones took as long as 18 years. It just, yeah, if they really wanted an airstrip, then they would find a way to do it.
Yeah.
It's a different sort of attitude to time, I suppose, to the Western world.
Yeah, I guess they're building the future of the village or the connections with the outside world in constructing.
Yes, basically, yeah.
Really fascinating. So, Matt, tell us a little bit about the airplane. You obviously really like the Porter, and I've got another photo of you in a moment. But what's it like to fly? I mean, I've flown the Caravan a tiny bit, and it's like a giant 182 with a turbine engine. So very familiar to most light airplane pilots. What's the Porter like?
Yeah. I mean, I suppose it's not hugely dissimilar to a Caravan in regards of it's a big turboprop. Obviously, the fact that tail dragger changes things a little bit on the ground handling. It's quite heavy on the ground, actually, with the rudders. But generally, it's just a lovely plane to fly. It's beautifully harmonized in the controls. It's, for the size of it, it's quite responsive. The nearest thing I can compare it to would be a Harvard, I suppose, and it's quite purposeful, heavy sort of aircraft, but not sort of. I mean, brutish, I suppose, is probably a word. It's quite sort of brutish, but it's not unresponsive. It's nice to fly. It's very responsive in roll. It's slightly unstable, so because of that, it's very responsive. If you let go of the controls and sort of look down to fill in a tackle entry, it'll tend to be banked over at some funny angle, which you look up and correct it. And landing-wise, it's quite nice, actually. It's got a bit of a reputation as a widowmaker, and I think that's just because if you don't fly it with a bit of respect, if you sort of treated it like a carbon just sort of barreled in somewhere, that might not go so well for you. You just have to remember things like make sure the tail wheel's locked when you take off and land, because that will go wrong. Make sure your trim is set correctly, because again, it's a big plane. So if you don't have that set, then I think there's a lot of Porters were crashed on takeoff because the trim was just set too nose down or too nose up, and it either got airborne and stalled or it just never got off the runway. So I mean, I loved it.
This is a real crossover between something like a Carb or something like a light airplane, and then something a bit more serious. So it's got that procedural element to it.
Yeah.
Tail wheel locking. That's apart from you appear to be very happy with that airplane there, if I'm really honest.
Oh, I'm giving it a big hug, definitely.
But you're a little taller than me, and they are big tires.
Yeah, yeah. It's I mean, the pressure on those tires is only 20 psi, so they're quite low pressure, just because of the environment. I mean, if you're landing it on wet, boggy airfields, you just need to distribute that mass a little bit. You see these sort of super cubs with these big Tundra tires on, and I suppose they're probably similar size to that thing. Yeah, you need to distribute that mass a little. Even the tail wheel's quite large on the Porter. I mean, it does weigh, was it 2.8 tons max takeoff weight? So that's pretty heavy on a bit of grass.
And it looks tough. I mean, that's a huge wide track as well, which I presume helps with the directional control.
Yeah,
what are those leading off the wheels? There's a sort of L-shaped thing coming out the hub.
Yeah, so you've got sort of wishbone suspension onto those really big struts. And actually, when you land on really rough terrain, you can see those wheels just really bouncing around. You're also sort of touching down at sort of 60 knots or so, which if you were to drive a 4x4 Land Rover or something at that sort of speed on some of the terrain you land the Porter on, I think it would probably destroy the wheels on it, because the suspension travel is massive. But those little L-shaped things, those are the stone guards. They're to stop stones and things pinging up and hitting the flaps and the elevator on the back. The elevator is only Coke can thick material. It's super thin.
Okay.
The always bit that scared me on the Porter was the two bolts that held the tailplane on. There's just two. There's one on either side and a third one on the actual actuator. And they weren't big bolts. They were sort of 8mm bolts. I would sort of picture the forces going through those and just try not to think about it too much.
I've flown British airplanes. This is a Swiss airplane. There's probably some very bright Swiss gentleman or lady somewhere that's done all the calculations, and they will very reassuringly tell you that 2 bolts is quite enough. If you go and look at British airplanes,
I'm absolutely certain.
There'll be a patch of bolts about this big, and usually a load of doubler plates and stress cracks between them. So more is not always better.
Yeah, it's true.
It's a fascinating looking airplane. I mean, it's difficult to say that it's beautiful, but it sort of is.
Yeah, I would agree with that. It's a sort of how would you sort of describe it? Sort of beautifully ugly, but purposefully ugly, I suppose. I don't know.
And it's built to do a job, isn't it? And
it is.
And I think you develop a different relationship with a flying machine when you work with it. Would you agree?
Yeah, I'd say so. Although I suppose if you owned an airplane for a long time, you'd probably develop a similar relationship. I would say. But certainly with an aircraft like this, you basically you trust it with your life, day in, day out.
Yeah.
And so you do develop a bit of a bond with them.
Yeah.
And particularly with the Porters, they're all hand built, so they're all a bit different. And so there were some that were just nicer than others that you just enjoyed flying a little bit more than others. But that became very personal, because I know some guys would sort of, there's a couple of planes I really liked that other guys didn't really like, and vice versa. It was just sort of a personal bond, I suppose.
Elaine here said before there were flights, were these places completely inaccessible? And I know we're going to come on to a story later on when you were hiking and enjoying some adventures, but is this fairly typical of a tribes?
I mean, I wouldn't say it's more typical of the chaps in the background wearing the sort of Western clothing. That's a bit more typical. But there are still quite a few still wearing the traditional clothing. But yeah, to answer the question, yes, they were very inaccessible. Hiking was the only way you get in between all of these kind of villages before the aeroplanes all came along. It obviously changed their world forever. Whenever the first expedition was sort of 1930 something, pre-Second World War anyway, was the first kind of Western contact with these tribes.
I mean, really fascinating.
And,
And did you sort of did you ever find yourself thinking, okay, I've got myself into a situation where I really shouldn't be here. I shouldn't be here. This has gone very badly wrong.
Yeah, I mean, not as often as you might imagine, considering the environment, to be honest. It's probably one or two times that was sort of, it's more weather related. You've come down a valley, I do remember coming into a valley once, and it looked okay, and I was just hugging the one side of the valley, and it was drizzling a little bit. There's quite a lot of low cloud around, but I could see the runway, and I thought, this is okay.
And Matt, is it right? You try and fly on one side of the valley to.
You do, yeah. You always fly on the
Yeah.
right-hand side, because obviously, as pilot, you sit on the left of the airplane, so it allows you view into the left of the valley. And I always had a rule that you don't fly down a valley that you can't either A, land at the end of it, or B, do a 180 turn back out. That's kind of the golden rule, really. And yeah, basically sort of came down, and the airfield just sort of disappeared. And so I was like, okay. So I could see the right side of the valley, couldn't see the left side, but I knew it was enough to make the turn. But it was, yeah, I shouldn't have gone down there. It was not very nice. It was scary. One of those things you sort of get back out and you think.
But if we go back down to your instructor's kind of box example, you were pushing the corner.
Yeah, and it went outside a little bit.
Okay, so we learned something, and we lived to fly. Okay.
Absolutely. Yeah. That's it. That's kind of what it was out there. It was a lot of that sort of thing.
And getting airborne from somewhere like this, you just point it straight down the hill and off you go.
You'd think that. If it's dry, then that would generally work. But quite often it would be drizzling and very wet and slippy. This air feels quite muddy. It looks quite dry in that picture there. But yeah, when it's wet and muddy with an aircraft with a big engine like the Porter, which is 550 horsepower, big propeller, all spinning that way. So you've got P factor from the prop, you've got the gyroscopic precision, you've just got the engine torque itself, the washdown one side of everything pulls you left basically. And so you kind of need to start with the aircraft pointing off to the right a little bit in order to compensate for that, so that when you go over that lip, the aircraft's still kind of pointing right, but then as you kind of increase in the power, it sort of then pulls itself straight. And then in theory, you track straight down the middle of the runway rather than going off to the left, as I found out on one occasion, and very nearly went off the side. That was another occasion where I got to the edge of that box, shall we say. It was a matter of either close the power and accept the fact we're going off to the ditch, or give it everything and hopefully get the thing airborne before we go into the ditch. And the latter proved to be the right choice. But again, that's another one of those experiences you chalk up, I suppose.
And the whole environment is geared up for an adventure, and it's obviously a very unforgiving environment. You presumably enjoyed the area and lived a bit of a different life.
Yeah. Absolutely. I mean, it was just a proper adventure, really. The whole time out there was, when you weren't flying, you were in this wilderness, basically. So, quite a few of us were quite keen to go and explore it. And obviously, we'd all read this book, which, by the way, if you haven't read, you should definitely read. It's probably one of my favorite books of all time. Proper adventure story from the Second World War of a DC-3 or C-47 that crashed just on a jolly at the end of the Second World War. They wanted to go and see the valley that I was working in. They nicknamed it the Shangri-La, and this Dakota crashed, and there was some survivors, and the wreck was still there. So I went out with some friends to go and find it, and we did. It was very, very, very cool. Very cool to sort of see this, having read the book, to then see the whole thing there. Actually, I have a little piece of that fabric, and that's now that I have a copy of that book, and so the bookmark for that book is a bit from the aircraft it's written about, which is quite cool.
That is cool. I think this might be Mr. Dearden Senior.
Yes, that's my father. Hello, Michael.
That's your dad. Who is? How old is he?
He's 82 and also a drone pilot. So that's very, very cool.
That is awesome. But yeah, I hadn't heard about this book at all, and I'm definitely going to grab it. It's available on Amazon. I'll try and get my copy before everybody on this live stream goes and buys a stocking filler. But it seems extraordinary. You said you couldn't figure out why they hadn't made it into a movie yet.
Yeah, I mean, it's just got all the hallmarks of a movie. I mean, obviously, it's sort of Second World War. It's got a survival story. There's a really pretty lady in there, and it's just, the rescue operation, I don't want to say too much about it, but the way they got the survivors out is it's amazing. It's right out of Hollywood. It's almost unbelievable, actually. It's very, very cool. Great read, actually. Really good read.
I can't wait to grab it and look. Here we go. Look, so Adam's a great friend of the show, and Adam knows a few things about airplanes. He's loving your experiences. So this is you back here now. So I guess at some point you decide, okay, that's enough. Let's come back to the UK. And talk to me about, because people are asking this kind of question. So you get back to the UK, and so why did you come back, and what are you doing now?
So why did I come back? I know everyone always asks me that one. I guess I felt like I'd done it, really. 7 years is quite a long time to do something, and it was really good fun, and I had to come back for something I'd really want to do. So I really wanted to explore Europe. That was, it's a part of the world, despite having sort of grown up in the UK and the Middle East, I'd never really done Europe. I'd never seen much of Europe. So I really wanted a job doing that sort of thing. Airlines, I guess, one option, but I figured you're not really going to see very much of Europe as an airline pilot, particularly a low-cost operator. So corporate was obviously the way it was going to go. And obviously being a bit of a Pilatus fanatic, PC-12 was the obvious one. And fortunately, I managed to sort of get that job, basically, and been doing that for over 3 years now. Flying, well, that one there, that's, I think, Innsbruck, that picture.
Looks like Innsbruck.
So I still get to fly in the mountains. Yeah, so I still get to fly in the mountains, which is brilliant. Combining that with my little Super Cub, which we won't talk about that too much because it's been in maintenance for 2 and a bit years now, but it's nearly done. It's nearly out.
Listen, if you're an aircraft owner, you have to be able to take the best way to is the rough, the smooth. That's the best way to deal with it, and it's going to be beautiful when it's finished, and hopefully we're going to meet up. Meet.
Absolutely.
For people who haven't flown the PC-12, I mean, it's a fantastic aeroplane. I was blown away by it, and
you loved it. I love it.
It's a Bonanza multiplied by 10. A really spectacular machine, and go anywhere, do anything. Really extraordinary.
It really is. There's a reason they're so popular in Europe, and it's you can actually take 8 adults and all their luggage and go somewhere 2 hours away with reserves and everything. I mean, you need a pretty big jet to do that with, actually, for that to work.
It really proves that point about single engine turbine. But multi-engine turbine, just presumably your Papua stuff, that just couldn't have been done with a multi-engine airplane. Not in any kind of safe, meaningful way.
No, I mean, the Twin Otter is the only plane that would get close to being able to do that sort of thing. And I know, speaking to the people who used to fly those, you basically had to accept if an engine failed, it was a single engine plane.
Yeah.
That was just the way you had to do it. So what was the point having 2 in a way?
And so tell me about so that's you in the Catalina. It's not just you flying very near the water. That's you in the Catalina.
Yes. So
tell me about the cat.
So that's been the last 5-6 years, I suppose, flying that thing. Air shows all over Europe. Obviously, currently is stuck in Loch Ness, which I've had a bit of an engine problem about a month ago now, and we're very grateful to everyone who donated on the crowdfunding for that. That's really going to help us out. And I'm actually going up there tomorrow to hopefully bring it back next week, if the fog will lift. And the winds stay light, then we'll get it home.
And it's an extraordinary machine. I mean, this is a absolutely awesome picture of it. I've got a slightly closer one. So Toby's had his drone out, obviously.
Yeah, it's a great pic. Great pic.
But what really struck me was how boat-like is probably the right word. It looked from that angle, but it's an extraordinary airplane. And we had a conversation about. You were telling me about flying back from Biscarrosse, but we'd had a previous conversation about some of the very, very long missions that it's done in the Pacific theater.
I mean, it was known as a sort of the double sunrise flights. They could fly with extra fuel tanks was like 36 hours or something outrageous. You know, I mean, even with just the standard fuel tanks, it's got about 20 hours endurance, each tank being 720 imperial gallons. So the numbers are huge. Even the oil tanks are 45 gallons each.
Yeah.
So it's, you know, the numbers on the plane are pretty impressive, actually.
Yeah.
An
extraordinary
how on earth
machine.
you fly it for that long? Oof. I mean, it's not a nice plane to fly, actually. It's quite sensitive in pitch, very unresponsive in roll, and really heavy in rudder, and totally unharmonized. It's like a glider. If you bank it, it doesn't turn; it just slips. So you need lots of rudder to kind of make it turn. But you get used to it, and then you get into a good sort of harmony with the whole thing, and it becomes quite a sort of interesting plane to fly, actually.
And I watched you display at Shuttleworth, and having heard you talk about how tough it is to fly the thing, it gave me a kind of a newfound respect, really, for what a huge lump of metal it really is. But also, you know, all these airplanes exist to kind of commemorate the people that flew them and did fly them for 20, 25, 30 hours, trying to win a war.
Absolutely. Yeah, I know. Every time I get in the plane, you know, a lot of it's changed, but majority of it is still original. The controls are all still original, and there is always a sort of feeling of, you know, what's this plane seen? What's it done? You know, it's that's why we still fly them, just to kind of commemorate it all. It's lovely.
Well, Matt, look, we're absolutely at time. I don't want to. We could talk forever and ever and ever. It's really fantastic. I'd really like to get you back on, and we'll chat about maybe recovering the airplane from Loch Ness. People have asked some great questions about challenges since leaving Susi Air and so on. So I think there's just so much we could talk about. Maybe particularly in the summer comes around, we'll maybe go somewhere and record some interviews.
Yeah, maybe we can actually do it in person.
Wouldn't that be nice? So Matt, we're going to say goodbye. Thank you very much. Thanks for being here.
Thank you for having me. Thanks so much. Good to see you, Lyndsay.
Bye, Matt.
Welcome back.
Thanks. I'm going to have to tag you in if you're up next.
Yeah, understood.
So just to finish off this evening, looking ahead to next week, we're going to have a slight change of format. So Mark, Scott and I are really proud to announce that the Layover channel is going to be hosting the live stream for the Pilots Together charity raffle. And as you can see here, it's on the 6th of December, next Sunday, from 4 o'clock until 8 o'clock. So you can tune in. We're going to give you an insight into the charity. We're going to give you an opportunity to hear about the work the charity's been doing. But most importantly, for when you've bought your ticket, we're going to see if the winning ticket belongs to you. Now, the raffle itself is huge. There's been lots of momentum on Twitter, on our Instagram, and on our Facebook page advertising the prizes, but there are some unique money can't buy prizes. So just to give you a little taster, there's an Airbus A380 sim, Boeing 747 sim. There's some limited edition artwork, which if you had your way, our walls would be full of it.
We'll be absolutely full of it.
Awesome. Flight radar subscription, a chance to go in the world's only Spitfire simulator, which for you might be the closest that you get.
All right, okay.
There's a 747 tribute watch. There's a visit to Nat's air traffic control at Heathrow, and that's just a few of the prizes. So all of the details for that, you can check the website pilotstogether.org, and that's where you can also buy your tickets. So have a look, and please support the worthy cause as we go ahead into next week.
Yeah, and thanks very much, because we know everybody's it's kind of charity season, isn't it? And everybody's asking you to put your hand in your pocket, but there are some great prizes, great cause. There's a huge amount of work that's gone into it, and thanks to all of those who've given as well. Anything else, Mark? I think that's it. I think we'll wrap up there. I think we've done all right without Scott. I think we've done quite a bit. No one's pressed all the buttons like Scott normally does. Anyway, look, it's great to see you all. Thanks for being with us tonight.